This happened a couple of days ago to me and my girlfriend. We were house sitting for my girlfriend's dad. My girlfriend's dad lives in a rather large house in a suburban neighborhood, just outside one of the major cities in Denmark. What I'm trying to say here is that his neighborhood isn't exactly scary or dangerous by any means, which only meant that this gave us a bigger scare than it probably would have had it been in one of the more dangerous parts of town. After coming home from buying groceries and stocking up on necessity for our weekend stay at his house, we went to the living room to lie down and have some quality time for ourselves, which we hadn't had in a long time. Now, before I go any further, just let me clarify the lay of the land here. This house had a rather large living room and a floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the room. Outside this floor-to-ceiling window is a sensor-triggered light system. As we were lying there watching TV, I get this weird feeling that something is watching me. At first, I try and shake it off, like it's no big deal, thinking to myself it's probably just because I'm in a new house where I don't yet feel entirely at home. But as I look to my girlfriend, I see too that she is quite shaken up about something. After a few minutes of silence, she then asks me if I have the same feeling as her, like someone was watching us. I try to play it off as nothing, and I tell her that I'll just go grab a cigarette and check to see if anyone's out there, just to make her feel safer. As I turn my head towards the floor-to-ceiling window, I notice that the lights are on. Now this shakes me to my very core, and I quickly decide not to go out for that cigarette. By this time, I feel my girlfriend's hand squeezing my arm. As I turn around to her, I see her pointing out one of the windows, and outside is a silhouette of a person. My blood freezes. In that moment, I turn around and quickly grab my phone. And as I turn back, the person had disappeared. I call my parents, as I know they were out at a friend's house not too far from where we were. My dad tells me to lock all of the doors and windows and just sit tight and wait for them to arrive. A couple of minutes go by, and nothing happens other than me trying to get my girlfriend to calm down, as I know how this affects her blood sugar levels, and I would rather not have her have a seizure while a creeper or burglar or even a murderer is walking around outside the house. The silence is then broken by the sound of windows being tampered with. At this point, I'm trying really hard not to freak out and cause any further panic. But luckily, seconds later, I hear my dad pull up outside the house. My girlfriend and I have since discussed who it might have been, and we've come up with a few possible suspects, one of them being my girlfriend's crazy mother, who has a severe mental illness. The other more possible suspect would be just a simple burglar. I don't really care who it might have been. I'm just glad whoever it was didn't manage to break in. This past August, I picked up a lot of side jobs house sitting while working at a ranch that gave horseback riding lessons. The families were all very nice, and it paid well. This past November, I was house sitting for a family and watching their Labrador retriever named Maggie while they were on vacation. They lived in a very nice neighborhood on the outskirts of a small town. The house was on the far end of the neighborhood, and thick trees flanked the backyard, and a dirt road ran behind the trees. I accidentally went down the road the first time and tried to find the house, but there wasn't much down there. Just an abandoned house with lots of deer in the front yard and a small rundown ranch house. The first night, everything was great, but the second night, not so much. I had this weird feeling a few hours before I went to bed, but I wrote it off as spending too much time reading creepy stories on Reddit. I made sure all the doors were locked, blinds were closed, and I went to bed just after midnight. But as I fell asleep, I still couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Maggie usually sleeps with me, but that night she just followed me up the stairs and to the bedroom, and then just sulked back downstairs. At 2:26 a.m., Maggie woke me up by standing next to the bed and whining. I had just let her out before I went to bed, and I was pretty sure she didn't have to go to the bathroom. I rolled over and hoped that she would stop, but she didn't. I gave in soon enough, and as I climbed out of bed, I realized that the house was freezing cold. I followed Maggie downstairs to the kitchen. All the doors to the house were weird. You can't open any of them from the inside or outside without a key. Not to mention this was a very heavy door, not the kind that just gets blown open by the wind. The only thing that eased my mind was that Maggie didn't seem ready to kill an intruder, and she'll usually at least bark at you. So I did a quick look around. I was too scared to do anything more. Nothing seemed out of place. The owners often left credit and debit cards, as well as wads of cash lying on the counters. And it was all there. If anyone was going to steal something, it was right next to the door, and easy pickings. But since nothing was missing, I tried to brush it off as just forgetting to lock the door. I made sure it was locked this time, and went back to bed. Maggie still didn't want to sleep with me, and went back downstairs. Less than an hour later, she woke me up again. This time, I didn't question her. I crept back downstairs more cautiously than I had before. The back door was open again. This time, the key that had been sitting on the kitchen counter was in the lock. Someone had been in the house with me. The police were called. They looked all around the house but found no one. Everything of value was still in place, so I was really worried about the intentions of whoever broke in. The family was shocked that something like that happened and have since moved to a farm 20 minutes away and now have video surveillance. This happened to my sister about 15 years ago when she was still in high school and I was in middle school. Our mom worked as a house cleaner and always became friends with everyone's home she would clean. One of the homes was owned by an older couple who had no kids but had a huge house and a really nice pool that they would always invite me and my siblings to come swim in. The husband worked as a COO of a large airline company, and they lived in a very nice neighborhood on a large lot surrounded by forest. When you were in their backyard, you couldn't see the other houses at all, just trees. It felt very secluded. Their house was very angular and architecturally interesting, with multiple levels made from stone. Pretty much every room had huge floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the backyard and gave great views during the day. At night, however, the reflection from the inside lights prevented you from seeing out, so it was always a bit unnerving to walk by them, since you couldn't see what was out there. The couple also decorated with old Native American art and masks, which was a little creepy to a middle schooler, but the couple were very nice and not so creepy, so I never got too scared. They had an older golden retriever named Samson that lived up to his name, as he was massive, but had a sweet and gentle temperament. They also recently rescued a husky mix named Sadie, who was the polar opposite, Psycho Sadie, as we so lovingly called her. She had intense separation anxiety, and she would destroy their house whenever they left her inside, jump their short fence if they left her outside, and if they took her with them to run errands. She would destroy their car and howl nonstop until they returned. So since they were wealthy and had extra money, they would pay for me or my sister to come over and dog sit while they went out. We got $20 an hour, so we were always excited to go over there and watch cable and swim in their awesome pool. Normally everything would be fine, and both dogs would usually just lay around. But occasionally Sadie would realize that I was a stranger and go nuts and start barking at me, and I watched her eyes literally turn red. I was convinced that she was going to attack me, but she eventually calmed down after I got up from the couch and showed her how big I was. But I digress. This particular incident happened over Easter weekend, while the homeowners were out of town for 2 days. They were paying my sister to stay there over the weekend, and I stayed with her the first night, because it was a big house and kind of scary to stay there all alone. We stayed up late watching movies and eating junk food. The next day, we swam in their pool and hung out, but for some reason I didn't spend the night again. And I'm so glad I didn't, because what happened that night scared my sister for life. It all started when my sister was working out on their treadmill. Their workout room was on the bottom floor of their home, which was a walkout basement. Just outside the room was a huge sliding glass door that opened to their patio and pool. She had the TV on in their workout room. As she was running and watching TV, she thought she heard the house alarm beep like it did whenever the door was opened. She stopped the treadmill and went to look around and saw that the sliding glass door was opened. Now this door was huge. There was no way it could have opened by itself, so she was instantly freaked. However, the dogs were just lying there in the workout room, and she figured that they would have gotten up to investigate if someone had come inside, and because Sadie was a bit crazy and hated strangers, she thought that she might have accidentally left the door open, and just imagined the beep of the alarm, and that it could have come from the TV or the treadmill. She closed and locked the door and went back to working out. A couple of minutes later, she had the distinct feeling of someone watching her. She looked around, but no one was there. She finished her workout, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She decided just to go to bed, as she was becoming a little creeped out, and just wanted to forget about it. She went around and made sure all the doors were locked. The owners didn't give her the alarm code, so she couldn't set it. She took a shower and locked herself in the guest bedroom with both dogs, just in case, and eventually fell asleep. A couple hours later, she awoke with both dogs growling at the door of the room. Now it was fairly normal for a psycho Sadie to growl and bark for no reason, but Samson had never barked or shown any signs of aggression. So immediately my sister knew something was up. She was shaking and trying to convince herself that the dogs had just heard an animal and that it was nothing, but then she heard the dreadful door alarm beep. She called my dad in a panic, crying and screaming, and he told her to hang up and call the police as he was on his way over. She called the cops and my dad made the 15-minute drive in just under 5 minutes. When she opened the bedroom door to let my dad inside the house, the dogs took off running and barking through the house and downstairs to the basement. My sister ran screaming all the way through the house to the front door to let my dad in. He quickly took a look around the house with his gun, but did not see anything unusual. The police arrived a few minutes later and looked around the property. They found that the back gate was open, as well as the sliding glass door again, but not enough to let the dogs out. Just barely ajar, like it had been slammed shut and bounced back open a bit. They said it looked like someone had entered the home through the sliding glass door because the lock was tampered with, but they determined that whoever it was hadn't stolen or disturbed anything. When my dad asked why someone would break in and not do anything, especially with the dogs locked up, the police said that they had been notified by the homeowners earlier that month that the husband received a death threat because of a decision that he made at his job that put a lot of people out of work. They had gone to the police about it, but didn't bother to tell my sister to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Needless to say, we never dog sat for them again, and they moved out of state within a few months because the husband lost his job, and if you ask me, he deserved it. I live in a town of about 11,000 in rural Wisconsin, not by reference but for a job. We are moving when I get a better one. I was on my way to my employer's house. He runs the company out of his basement until we get a new office space. I was being tailgated bad by a ratty blue car and a white bald guy. I drive a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end. So if I can't see your headlights, that means you are a mere few inches off my butt, and you will get me tapping my brakes. This guy did. He honked at me. Whatever. I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind me, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had chances to pass me on the country road, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around, and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a picture of him. Then I pretended to call 911. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was getting creepy. I came to my turn, but decided to see if this guy would follow me. I turned left, and he followed. Then I came to a roundabout, and thought I would lose him. I traveled the entire thing around twice, and he still followed me. At this point, I knew he was messing with me, trying to scare me. Well, I decided to let myself be late for my meeting. I began to drive to the police station. He had followed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would leave. Nope, he parked right next to me and just stared at me. And he pulled up on my side of the car, close enough that I would have a hard time opening the door all the way. He was in his 40s, I'm guessing, wearing sunglasses and a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, nothing scary there. The interior of the car was pristine. I was anticipating to see a gun. I should mention here that I'm training to be a behavior analyst, and while I work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal behavior and profiling. I was seriously trying to read this guy. A few seconds went by and I grabbed my phone again, this time intent on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, he rolled his passenger window down, said nothing, rolled it back up and took off. I went inside and told an officer what happened. Sadly, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate number. Apparently, there had been a lot of complaints about tailgaters recently, multiple with a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and they gave me a card for victim services in a local woman's shelter, just in case he followed me home one night and I didn't feel safe. But I live in a secure building with my fiance. I went out to my car, and there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face. Serious horror movie stuff there. I took it back inside. The officer said he'd call me a few times during the night, and I should avoid going anywhere alone for a while. He did call twice, and said he was patrolling my parking lot during his night shift. This is a small town, and the attitude around here is very communal, so I feel safe that someone will back me up. If I ever see this guy again, no question, I will call 911 and lead him straight to the police station again. I also told my fiance that I will post my work schedule, or even when I have to leave for another reason, that if I don't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated arrival, to call 911. This happened like 16 years ago. I was 12 then. I was in the summer camp of my Boy Scout troop, but with both boys and girls. As are all in Spain, scouting here is actually a quite liberal thing. One of the most important activities during the summer camp is what we call the raid, basically going out of the camp to adventurously trek for a couple of days. My friends and I planned an amazing route through a beautiful mountain range called the Pyrenees in the northeast of Spain. 3 days walking, 2 nights sleeping out of the camp. My raid group consisted of 15 boys and girls, all between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. We took food with us, knew how to read a map, how to build shelter, how to search for water, and pretty much anything necessary to survive for a couple of days. So no adults were coming with us. That doesn't happen anymore. Our plans for the first day were to climb a mountain that was just under 10,000 feet high and sleep by a glacial lake nearly on top of it. It was a long walk from our camp, about 15 miles and quite steep, so at about 1800 we decided we were going to not reach the lake at a prudent time. We found a nice place to build a shelter, did it, and then cooked some dinner. We were in the middle of a beautiful mountain, about 6 miles from the nearest road, and let's add another 5 kilometers more to the closest village. We couldn't have been happier. We still had nearly 2 hours until sunset when we finished our meal, so we thought it was a good idea to send a smaller group to clean dishes and refill water to a spring we had seen while walking. I volunteered to go and 3 other friends joined. We got a couple of light torches too, just in case, and headed towards the fountain. Night came while we were on our way back to the shelter. We could hear the rest of the group singing and having fun in the distance. Suddenly, one of my friends stopped and pointed at something just by the side of our trail. This wasn't here on our way down. "I'm sure of it," he said. There was a light reflecting pole from the road, torn into pieces. We went from being happy and relaxed to being mildly scared in just a second and rushed all the way to where the rest of our friends were. We told them about our creepy finding right away. We were just kids, so fear escalated quite fast. Who could be hiding in the same mountain we were at, and why? Two of the older guys, they were 14 years old, thought it would be a good idea to go and take a look around to try to calm us down. Although being without them was even scarier, we also appreciated it. They went away with a light torch, a knife, and a whistle so we could hear from further apart if they were in trouble. We remained seated inside the shelter, which was nothing more than a couple of tarps held by sticks near a big boulder, silent and scared. I remember hearing quite a lot of sobbing around me. I was thinking I didn't want to die there. One of the girls suggested that we could sing to try and think of something else. Some disapproved because we might not hear the whistles, but we did anyway, although not very loud. We were like that for about 10 to 20 minutes. The whistle interrupted our song. We heard it clearly. Two whistles coming towards us at a really fast pace. I remember taking my knife from its sheath and keeping it in my hands. Luckily, it was our friends. They arrived nervous and exhausted from the run. They said they stumbled upon a long-standing stick with lots of blood all over it, more than what our nerves could stand. Most of us started crying. Some prayed too. They told us they were going back to look for whatever was in the mountains with us and confront him. In case things go bad, we'll run somewhere else so he can't find you, one said. We asked them to stay, but nobody was able to move a finger to stop them from leaving. There was no more singing, only weeping and barely audible prayers. I just didn't want to die there. I wanted to see my family. After a while, we heard some noises followed by the voices of our friends. They came back at a calm pace with relief in their faces. It was all just a misunderstanding, one explained. It's just a park ranger. We found him, and he explained to us that he was just walking around as part of his duty, said the other, and the bloody stick was just from a rabbit he had hunted for dinner. It was quite a relief, and we relaxed. Someone even spoke about taking out our sleeping bags and going to sleep, and that sounded wonderful. But it wasn't long until one of the older guys said he was a bit suspicious. You see, he wasn't wearing a uniform, he said, nor a badge or anything that could identify him as a ranger, answered another, and who walks kilometers away from the closest road, late at night, to hunt rabbits. Are there even rabbits in this altitude? Terror came back in a second. They were right, that story didn't make any sense. Let's go back there and freaking threaten him, one of the older guys said. We asked them to stay with us again and got the same results. Once they were gone, someone said that maybe he had followed them and now knew exactly where we were. We all shivered in panic. Nobody was paying the slightest attention to anyone else anymore. Nobody cried and nobody prayed. I remember I only had one thought in my mind. I'd rather kill than get killed in this terrible place. We waited seated, silent and ready to fight for our lives. We all had our knives out and ready. Minutes passed, and suddenly we heard people running and approaching. We heard screams of terror. From the sound, it was obvious there were more than two people coming at us. I hadn't been more scared in my life. I hope I could say goodbye to my mom, my dad, and my sister. My knife was ready to stab whoever came close to me. We finally saw our two friends running for their lives, being followed by two men. They came just at the front of the opening of the shelter and stopped. The two men chasing them did the same, and we could see their faces. They were our camp leaders who had been following us all the time, but hiding, and the four started laughing at us and asking if we were scared. It was just a joke the entire time. Everyone started crying, and some even had trouble to grasp proper breaths due to anxiety for quite a while. We were all not amused, and only after a couple minutes, the funny four realized what they had done. They had taken 13 children to the point of holding a knife and being willing to kill with it. We obviously relaxed a lot, but our fears became anger. It had been a joke way out of proportion, or the most basic of common sense. They spent quite a while saying how sorry they were, but we didn't care. We wanted them to leave us alone. But on the other hand, we were still too scared to sleep on our own, so we reluctantly accepted that they all came to sleep with us. It took them months to regain our trust again. It was the worst night of my life, no doubts. I've never had nightmares about it, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Now that I'm older, I always like to think of what would have happened if two guys had been there to kill us. We were children, sure, but armed and ready to defend ourselves if need be. I'm a journalist, so I can't help but think of some headlines. 2 murderers stabbed to death in the mountains by 13 children. Things were a lot different back then, and the Scouts has definitely changed for the better. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend with a psychotic alcoholic father. She didn't live with him. He lived in a remote little coastal town. Now and again, we would go together to visit him and stay the night. My relationship with him was creepy in itself, but that isn't the subject now. One night, when we were visiting, my friend and her dad had a drunken blow-up and kicked us out of the house. It was about midnight. We had gotten a lift down and didn't have a car. My friend's dad lived about 4 kilometers out of town, a huddle of 2 or 3 shops by way of a dirt road. We started walking down the dirt road to the town, where there was a telephone booth. This was in the days before it was commonplace to have a mobile phone. I was going to call my folks, who lived about an hour and a half away, and see if they would come get us. The whole way to town, my friend was drunkenly moaning and crying about her broken relationship with her father, and she didn't let up by the time we got to the phone booth. We sat on a bench next to the phone while I woke my parents up. They agreed to come get us, and I sat down on the bench for the long wait. Shortly after this, a van appeared and parked just behind the bench we were sitting on, maybe 5 meters away. There were 2 young men in the front seats, and they were looking at us. If that didn't make me nervous enough, the van doors slid open, and I saw there were a number of young guys in the back. Remember how many? More than 2. The place we were sitting was deserted. There were no houses nearby, just more road. No people, nowhere to run, no one driving by. It was a crappy little nowhere town. I stood up so I could see them better and kept my eyes fixed on the van full of men, acutely aware of our vulnerability. What I saw was that they were looking back at us. They were talking among themselves, quietly at first. Then they started talking more and more loudly. It became evident that they were deliberately talking loud enough for us to hear. They were talking about pulling us into the van and taking us somewhere to have their way with us and kill us. I can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist of it. My whole body was not shaking, but quaking with terror. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. I remember the face of one of them so clearly. I could draw it now. He was just sitting in the door of the van, looking at me with no expression, looking at me with dead eyes, looking at me like I was a thing. At this time, my drunk friend hadn't stopped sobbing to herself. Whether she knew the van was there at all, I couldn't say. I knew I had to tell her about the danger, but I was actually so full of terror I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. That was when the most incredible thing happened. My friend's father, who has never apologized to anyone in his life, appeared, drunk, in his car. It's hard to describe how unlikely it was for him to do this. He could hold a grudge like no one you've ever met, and he was such a stubborn mule. He and my friend had an emotional reunion. The whole time my eyes were fixed on the van. The men had stopped talking and were just watching us. "Let's go," I said. We got in the car and started heading for my friend's dad's house. The van started up and began to follow us. I tried to explain to my friend's dad about the men, but he said, "I'll just slow down and they can pass." They slowed to a crawl behind us, and then they began to shout out of the windows, screaming threats. They followed us all the way down the dirt road, and then all the way down the driveway of my friend's dad's house. They just sat in the van behind us, and we sat in the car, waiting to see what would happen. All of my friend's dad's neighbors were holiday homes, and nobody was in that night. We knew that if the group of men decided to get out of the van and carry out those threats, we would get no help. After a very long time, the van backed out of the driveway, and they left. My parents came in a panic to the house, and they couldn't find us at the shops. My friend's dad hid in shame, and I went back to my family's house. I've been asked if I went to the police, but I can't remember. I don't think I did. It was a messed up time in my life, but that incident changed me forever. I'm a very fearful person now, and very overprotective of my kids, and I don't want to change because I'd rather be like this than accidentally trust one of the millions of psychos out there.